My name is Mark Cramer. I'm the CEO of Surf Canyon. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, tell us a little bit briefly about Surf Canyon.
Sure. It's a company I started about 3.5 years ago. And the concept back then, which remains today, was to re-rank, to develop an application or a technology for re-ranking search results in real time. So, in other words, to take input from the user as the search is taking place and to dynamically change the order of the results and their relevancies and thus the order on the fly. So 3.5 years is a pretty good amount of time. Since then, we've been able to develop the application. Originally, we were going to launch a website, much like DuckDuckGo. And right before the launch, however, we decided to change our tactic and to build a browser add-on instead. And we built one for Firefox. We built another one for Internet Explorer. I think that worked well for us because we actually had a technology. We had an application that was figuratively a layer on top of search, and now with an add-on that was it's now practically literally a layer on top of search. So it was something that could actually be ported in a browser application. So that worked out well. It's been downloaded, I think, about 1.3 million times now. We have a few 100,000 active users, defined as people who use the product within a 3-day period. And just recently, we have actually resurrected the initial search website that we were going to launch with in the first place. So it was nice to know that all that didn't go to waste. But it was only a couple months ago that we actually brought it back. And now, given that we've established a little bit of brand, we're able to drive some traffic to it. And it's also a great demonstration of what we can do server side. So that's the long-winded explanation. We're still a small company. It's still just a few people. But it seems like we've been making a lot of progress in the last few months.
There's a lot to talk about there. So first and foremost, 1.3 million downloads. Can you take us through how that happened, how it works, where all those numbers came from, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's not easy. We got a lot of lift from Mozilla. Mozilla develops Firefox, and as part of Firefox, they have a community of developers that build extensions, browser extensions. They call them add-ons. Excuse me. And we've been fortunate enough to be recommended on the Mozilla list for a number of months, and that has enabled us to capture a lot of downloads. Being recommended by Mozilla, there's no straightforward way to make that happen. I simply sent an email to the editors nominating our application, giving them some reasons why I thought it was unique and would be interesting for their community. Someone agreed, and there you go.
So were the bulk of the downloads after you were recommended, or did you have many hundreds of thousands before that?
The bulk of the downloads occurred after. Well, we launched our add-on in February of 2008, so it hasn't been that long ago. And we were put on the recommended list in June. And our timing could not have been better, because it was in late June that they actually launched Firefox 3. And you might remember it was a huge event, some enormous number of downloads in a single day. I think they set a Guinness Book of World Records for that. And we got to ride on that coattail. So talk about a bit of fortune, just getting in there the perfect time. They rotate add-ons in and out of their recommended list. We've been rotated out and then back in and out and back in. The bulk of the downloads come when we're on the list, on the recommended list. But when you're on it for a certain amount of time, you do build a certain amount of momentum. So so the numbers have fortunately continued to grow.
So besides being just a good add-on, do you think there's anything else that made your add-on particularly able to be on the recommended list?
Well, I think that so Mozilla in particular has a number of criteria that they look at when they're talking about add-ons. There are the things that I had mentioned previously. There's also security is important, transparency is important, utility for the users obviously very important. But another thing that they emphasize is responsiveness to the user community. And they want developers, and rightly so, by the way, they want developers who are going to who are going to listen to feedback from users, make adjustments, improvements, react to what people say. And I guess in short, you could call it customer service or user support. And it's a big job. It's actually requires a considerable amount of work, but we take it very seriously. I do pretty much all of it myself, and I'm on top of it all the time. So when people send me an email, I respond very quickly. When people post a comment, if it's a question, I'll respond quickly. If it's a review on the AMO site, I'll see what I can do to fix things. We also make adjustments very quickly to our add-on based on people's input. A while ago, we were having some compatibility issues with another add-on. We made a pretty big effort to essentially work around it to make our add-on compatible with theirs. And we're also put a lot of effort into trying to enable as many ways as possible for people to give feedback to us. So I think they like that. I think that's important.
So in terms of your active users, would you say they mainly come from the download and the add-on community? Or is there another stream of users coming in?
So we have downloads who come from a variety of different places. Mozilla is certainly the most important, but we're also on we have an IE add-on. It's actually a browser helper object. It's available on the Internet Explorer gallery. You can also actually get it from our homepage, and we actually get a considerable amount of traffic to our homepage, which produces downloads. We do PR. Not so much advertising, simply because it's expensive and it's very difficult to monetize these add-ons, and so what we do is rely on good press and word of mouth.
So in terms of how would you break down in terms of the other inputs of users compared to your Mozilla? Is IE gallery the second biggest, or?
Actually, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I would say that is comparable to our own downloads off our homepage.
And are people just randomly going to your site at this point from all your previous press, or is there particular ways that they're getting there?
Well, it's interesting when we're written up on a blog or we're written up by a website, we'll typically get a spike in traffic, and that spike is just slowly not slowly, actually quite rapidly drops, and then it reaches some kind of a low level of trickle that comes in. But you get enough of those, and then you get the accumulation of all those trickles, all the long tail people who show up, and it adds up to a reasonable amount of traffic. I don't think it's something that you could build a business on, but building a B2C business with add-ons is very difficult. It's a very challenging thing to do. I think that there are probably some people who are able to do it, although I would imagine that they're very few and far between. A lot of the add-ons that have been successful, I think, have been ones that either have a B2B component or have essentially been technology plays where they've been acquired for their essentially for their user bases or for whatever technologies they've built.
So would you say outside the Mozilla add-on community, there's no other great distribution mechanism for add-ons that's as much of a silver bullet type of thing?
I think that there exists some, but they're difficult. If you look at a company like Conduit, for example, from what I understand, they've had 170 million downloads. But what they've done is, so Conduit is a company that enables publishers to build custom toolbars, and they have an online wizard where you can go and basically design your own toolbar as a publisher. And they have a huge number of small and medium-sized publishers that distribute these customized toolbars. So that's certainly one way to do it. We're working with a company called Brand Thunder that develops customized browser themes for Firefox. And they work with a lot of medium and large size publishers. And they create these customized themes, and these publishers will distribute these to their so they're doing quite well as well. But both of these are B2B plays. There are companies that are successful in B2C, and this involves paying for downloads. So you can advertise, and there are a lot of different vehicles for advertising your download. The difficulty there is one of monetization. So if you have a toolbar, for example, those seem to work relatively well because you can make a download. I think a download in the U.S. is going to cost you somewhere between $2 to $5. And so if you're not making that much money, then ultimately you're not even going to be treading water. You're just going to be underwater very quickly. So, and we don't, so we're not.
In terms of your approach to getting all this press that you've gotten, do you have any particular approach to doing that, or are you out there trying to get coverage?
When we initially launched, we put a lot of effort into getting press coverage. And, like everything when you're starting a company, it's difficult. And actually, I'm sure you're aware of this yourself. You've done the same thing with DuckDuckGo. So pursuing various people in the media, giving them your pitch, explaining why you think they should write a story or a blog post, it's a tremendous amount of effort. But if you believe passionately in what you're doing, see, our business is a little bit different because we than others that I might have described. For example, like a toolbar business, simply because from the beginning, what we wanted to do was create this application for re-ranking search results. So we wanted to build a technology, and we look at the add-on as a vehicle for delivering it. So when I talk to people in the media, I talk about, why our search innovation is important and why this is improving the search experience and that sort of thing. So we can make compelling stories along those lines. Probably haven't done it so much recently because you need news. So there needs to be something new, and it's often difficult to come out with things that are new. Certainly we're making progress every day, but when we launched, that was an event, and we were able to do a certain number of things around it. We did hire an individual, a consultant, to help us with PR, and we're actually very happy with what he's been able to produce because he was the person who got us in touch with Walt Mossberg, with whom I met in Washington, D.C., and the Mossberg solution actually ended up writing a column on us. So that was probably our, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, the Mossberg column is if it's not the holy grail of tech PR, it's certainly a big one, and so that was kind of the apex of our PR so far.
A couple questions on that. Was the Mossberg hit? Was it also the biggest bump, and was it much bigger than the other press hits in terms of traffic?
Well, so whenever I mention Walt Mossberg, people always say, "Oh, you must have gotten a ton of downloads," and we did. You know, we got a lot of traffic to our website. It produced a lot of downloads, and all that's great. It is short-lived, though. If it wasn't a bump, if it produced a number of downloads that occurred every day, that would be tremendous. But you know, like everything in the media, you have your moment, it comes and then it goes, and so you get this one-time hit. We still get, like I mentioned previously, you know, we still get some trickle from that article that was back in January. But I think that from our perspective, and the reason why I was so happy about the being written up in that column is not so much for the downloads, but for the recognition and what I think it lended to our credibility. Because essentially what the column said was that these guys at Surf Canyon have created this thing which we find innovative and it works well and we like it. So it's not so much the number of people that read that, but hopefully the right people read it.
And this consultant who helps you get that, was that like a pay-per-performance type of thing?
No, it's a retainer.
And they just happen to deliver.
Well, you know, I would imagine that not all. So the getting written up by Walt Mossberg is obviously a pretty special thing, and I wouldn't attribute that to any one particular thing. It's probably a combination of lots of things. So here's what I attribute to. I attribute to our PR consultant, Stephen Blinn, who got us in there in the first place. I think we had a compelling. I think we have a compelling application. So it's actually something that I think is unique and it's interesting and it delivers value. So that's helpful. I think I did a good job pitching it, and in the end, I think there was also luck. And if you wanted, I could bore you with the 2 minute of how the timeline of what happened. It's actually, I guess now that I've asked you, you can't say no because it is relatively interesting. So I'll quickly give you the story. So so Stephen sent me an email one day, said, "Hey, I contacted Walt Mossberg. He said he'd be interested in meeting with you." So I had a conversation with Stephen. I said, "Great, you know, where is this going to take place?" Well, it turns out that his office is in Washington, D.C. So the question to me was, "You want to fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with him?" So I said, "Sure." I mean, there are not a lot of people I just fly across the country to have a meeting with, but he'd be one. I made a trip out of it, but I went, I met with him in his office. I demonstrated the application. I talked about what it did, why it's unique, why this is valuable. He said that he liked it, and he asked me for my business card. Now, Stephen told me beforehand that typically Walt doesn't like, or maybe I should call him Mr. Mossberg, doesn't like people following up, and I can completely understand that because he probably doesn't want to be hassled with everyone who pitches him, you know, bothering him. And so at the end of the meeting, I actually said, you know, I was told not to follow up, so just so you know, thank you for the meeting, and I'm not going to follow up, but I would love to hear from you. So a few months went by, and I didn't hear anything. However, we were actually selected to present at the VentureWire Showcase, which is a conference that was taking place in Silicon Valley. So we were fortunate enough to be one of the, I believe it was 50 companies, or it might have been 200, I can't remember, quite a few that were selected to present. Turns out that Walt Mossberg was the keynote speaker. So at the event, after his keynote address, I worked my way down to the stage elbowed my way in there and just quickly said, "Do you remember me from DC?" And he said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. I still have your software installed."
Oh, nice.
Which took me back a little bit. I was not really ready for that answer or that, but I was obviously happy about it. So I just quickly said, "We're coming out with version 2. Would you like me to send you an email about it?" And so he said, "Sure, please do." And this is when the luck comes in. So I'm at home a couple of days later, and I'm like, I need to send an email to Walt Mossberg about our version 2. But as I'm writing it, I have this epiphany. Google released SearchWiki only, I think, a week previously, and so that's the first bit of luck, just the timing. The second bit is that I decided that instead of just talking about Surf Canyon, I'm going to compare and contrast what we're doing to Google SearchWiki. So that was the second bit of luck. And so I wrote this very long email, but very well organized. It almost had like a table of contents at the beginning, but I put a lot of effort into it, and I basically explained how we compare to Google SearchWiki, how we're different, how they're different, so forth, and I sent it over. So the third bit of luck is that in January, they decided to write a piece on Google SearchWiki, and I guess something in my email resonated because they contacted me and they said we would also like to talk about Surf Canyon in this post about Google SearchWiki, and so I started having conversations with the person who's writing the article, Catherine Barrett, and lo and behold, on the 14th of January, the column comes out, and it is in fact an article about Google SearchWiki and Surf Canyon, comparing and contrasting the two. So that was longer than 2 minutes. I apologize, but I like this story, so you'll have to forgive me. You can just edit it later.
Oh, no way. That's a great story. So you mentioned earlier that you originally were going to launch a search product, and then you decided to do the add-on, and now you're sort of redirecting some add-on traffic or trying to your search engine. When you made that original decision, did you have this end goal in mind of doing well in the add-on and then redirecting traffic?
No, actually, I think that, without, complimenting ourselves too much, I think it's important to kind of be flexible. So our vision has remained relatively constant, but the way we deliver on that vision has actually changed dramatically. The original decision to not go with the search site is because I just felt people wouldn't use it. So we had a search site, and it was in private beta, and I had invited hundreds of people to check it out. And what we found was people would come, they'd kick the tires a little bit, and then they wouldn't come back. And I think our most frequent query was test, and the next one was hello. So this was not indicative of something that was sticky. And so we talked a little bit about, what could we do to make this sticky? And because the results that were on the page were Google. But what we eventually decided was that it's just very hard to get people to switch their default search engine. It's just very difficult. Even though we had Google's results on our own page, so the quality of the results was there, we didn't have maps and email, and there wasn't an iGoogle, and there wasn't all these other there wasn't video search and image search and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't like wrapped into the person's browser. All of those things we could have done because you can go out and you can outsource maps and videos. However, in the end, that seemed like a tremendous amount of work. And so here's another bit of luck. It was 2 weeks before we were going to launch the destination site, and I'm getting everything lined up, and I'm talking to our PR guy about who's the press going to be and what we're going to do and so forth. And then one evening, I'm sitting on my sofa with my laptop, and I have StumbleUpon installed on. I just decided to install StumbleUpon on Firefox. And I go to Google's page, and I notice that there's this little StumbleUpon icon next to every search result. And I looked at that for it must have been a good 10 minutes. And I understood what it was, but I was like, how did this happen? How did they get that on the Google search page? And then it came to me. We could do the same thing. We could build our application as an add-on and deliver it that way. People download it one time, and then they can take it with them and proceed on with their lives. So I went into the office the next day. I met with our developers, and I said, here's what we want to do. And of course, well, not of course, but as it so happens, the response was, it can't be done. And I said to Mike Wertheim, who's our chief architect, who's also best friend from high school. I've known him since I was 13, so we have a great working relationship, so that's very helpful. And I said to Mike, or he said to me, it's one thing to put a little icon on the search page. It's another thing to do what you're asking us to do, which is essentially to open up the search result page and insert results from other places and slide them in and make it all dynamic and all that kind of stuff. So I said, look, why don't we just spend 2 days and just try it. Do work on nothing else but this, and let's see if it can be done. The next day he had a prototype. And then that was it. The decision was there. It's like, it was ugly, but it was only 1 day of work. And he got it to kind of look. Now, that was in October, and we didn't launch till February. So it took 4 months including some holidays, to get it to be smooth and look beautiful, and the formatting, and get the back end tied in and do all that kind of stuff. But in the end, I think that it was a very good decision. Currently, our application processes over 500,000 queries every day, and I don't think we would have been able to do that with a search site. So other people have. So there's been companies like SearchMe and Cool and quite a few other very well-funded companies that have had some success with the search site, but they've had the marketing dollars to be able to drive the traffic to it. So.
And they haven't had that much success, those two in particular.
Well, okay, maybe those are two bad examples. As I was saying it, I was trying to think of a good example.
There's not really good ones, really.
It's very, very tough to get people to go to your search page, and you might open that up and just say any page, whatever your website is. To get people to go to it and use it is very, very tough. Which is why I think that things like applications. So it used to be that downloads and add-ons and applications, those were all bad, right? Because people never want to download anything, and they were also synonymous with viruses. It was going to mess up your computer, and who knows what would happen, right? Then mashups happened, and then add-ons happened, and then Facebook happened with Facebook applications, and the whole notion of customizing your internet experience with small pieces of software that you can install in your browser or your website or whatever it is you're doing, widgets, you name it. It's become much more mainstream.